Welcome to another episode of Teen Gen Talks hosted by me, Melissa,
and me, Desiree,
where the goal is to empower the Glendale youth and connect youth to community resources, individuals, and organizations through interviews and discussions.
And today we are joined by a special guest, Joey Clift. Joey is a comedian, TV writer, and enrolled Cowlitz Indian tribal member. Writing credits include Spirit Rangers on Netflix, New Looney Tunes on Cartoon Network, and Molly of Denali on PBS. He was named one of UpRock's 26 Native American comedians to follow in 2020, and his animated digital short, How to Cope with Your Team Changing Its Native American Mascot, was released by Comedy Central in October 2021. Most importantly, he created the LA Underground Cat Network, which is a 15,000 member strong Facebook group for Los Angeles comedians to share pictures of their cats.
So don't forget to follow us on our socials at Facebook and Instagram at MyGlendaleLAC. Don't forget to listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Also, make sure to give us a like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Glendale Library Arts and Culture, where we post full videos every Friday at 4:30 p.m. So thank you, Joey, for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. We have a lot to discuss.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to chat.
So to start off the interview, when did you know that comedy was your passion?
When did I know that comedy was my passion? That's a good question. So my story is kind of weird and windy in that I knew I loved comedy when I was really young. But because I didn't see any Native comedians on TV, I didn't think I was allowed to work in comedy. So instead, I went to school for what felt like the next best thing, which was to be like a small market TV weather guy. I figured they get to have weird personalities and crack jokes that made sense as how I could get paid making people laugh. It wasn't until probably I was in my mid-20s when some of my professors kind of gave me some advice that pushed me toward the direction of actually pursuing a career in comedy, that it felt realistic for me, or just as something that I could even do. Because it's I'm I don't have any uncles who are rich Hollywood producers or aunts that are rich Hollywood producers that could give me the advice of how to even tackle this industry. So I would say my whole life I've loved comedy. And I think that I've loved making people laugh for as long as I could remember, but as a career, probably not until I was in my mid-20s.
So was there a point in your journey that made you feel like you did not want to continue pursuing your passion?
Oh yeah, I mean, as a writer and comedian, every day is a fight. We're constantly filled with anxiety and just I could have been a doctor. Maybe I should have done that. It's the nature of, I think, working in a creative industry, where it's I feel like any creative probably has a conflicted relationship with their art, in that it's something that we love to do more than anything else, but also whenever you make anything, you're definitely putting some level of your soul and your spirit into it, and that's definitely just it's a lot of emotional work to create those kinds of things. So I think that advice that I've heard is that people who work in creative fields do that because they could not picture themselves doing anything else. And I think that that's kind of the case with me, and that though this is it's definitely an industry and a career and a lifestyle that's not without its stresses, but I also could not picture myself being happy doing anything else.
You have writing credits on Spirit Rangers on Netflix and New Looney Tunes on Cartoon Network, to name a few. How did these opportunities arise?
It's a good question. So writing jobs in the entertainment industry, it's oftentimes through word of mouth. It's these jobs aren't posted on job boards or Craigslist or anything like that usually. So I got my first job in Los Angeles. I was the assistant to a couple of executives. They created a show called Scare Tactics, hosted by Tracy Morgan in around 2010. While I was doing that, I got really involved in sort of the Los Angeles comedy scene, places like the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater, IO West, Second City. While I was progressing, through assistant jobs and rising through the ranks like that, I started doing a lot of live sketch comedy. A guy that I was on a sketch group with for one of the comedy theaters, he was like a working animator. He pitched and sold sort of like his idea on how to reboot Looney Tunes to Warner Brothers. This is around 2014. And he just liked working with me on the sketch group and thought I was funny. So he was like, hey, do you want to write Bugs Bunny shorts? And I was like, more than anything in my life ever.
Right.
And, so like that job kind of, gave me just like a really good resume builder of showing people that I could write, kids animation cartoons and stuff like that. And, that helped whenever I was kind of put in positions to be put up for, other animation opportunities. Being able to say that I'd done it previously definitely helped get me into a lot of those doors. So kind of, 20 jobs later, Spirit Rangers came about when a friend of mine, who's a really great native writer, was writing on a show with Chris Valencia, who created Spirit Rangers. He's a really great Shumash TV writer. Mm-hmm. And Chris just asked my friend Kelly, hey, do you know any other native writers? I sold a native TV show and I need native writers with animation credits. Mm-hmm. And Kelly very kindly was like, oh, my friend Joey, you should meet him. So I, got coffee with Carissa like 2 weeks before everything shut down in February of 2020. And, she pitched the show to me. We hit it off really well. I had like a really good kids 11-minute writing sample that I sent to her that she really liked. And, and that, we were just kind of off to the races at that point. She kept me in mind for when the room started, and then the writer's room started in like May of 2020.
So from being a comedian and a TV writer, what do you do when you have writer's block or inspiration isn't coming to you as quickly as you would like?
I don't necessarily look at it as like writer's block. I look at it as just like my brain getting tired. Like I feel like, the full disclosure is like I take a lot of naps. I take a lot of like walks around the block. I think that like when you're writing or making something, you're making a lot of like tiny decisions like at all times. It's just like, what's this character's name? What's their job? What room are they in? What is the scene about? What's the story that you're trying to tell? Because of that, things like decision fatigue can kind of cramp up, where like if you just have to make a lot of decisions, you just get tired. So I try to be really honest with myself about like, if I'm like trying to write a script and I kind of see myself drifting toward like Twitter or something, or like looking at my phone or texting friends or whatever, I'm like, okay, I think that's my brain telling me that it needs to like not write for 20 minutes. So I'll, take a nap, get up, take a walk, go make lunch, just like do something to kind of get my brain off of it. And then usually by the time that I've done that, when I like sit down to write again, like I've either, given myself the rest that I needed to get the thing done, or just like while taking a nap or going for a walk or eating or whatever, my brain was back end processing the question I needed answered. So when I sit down, it's kind of like come up with the answer. So that's sort of like when I'm specifically working on something. I also like to do something if I'm between projects and I'm kind of trying to ideate on what the next thing is. I like to do something called morning pages. So basically like every morning, if I'm motivated enough to do it and productive enough to do it, I'm not as good about it as I'd like to be. I'll set a timer for 5 minutes, and then I'll pull, like literally while I'm laying in bed, I'll like pull out a notebook and then just freehand whatever for 5 minutes. Sometimes those are just like micro ideas for things. Sometimes it's just me writing, I'm tired and don't want to write. Sometimes it's me being like, shouldn't I just go to the gym instead of writing this? But, usually if I do that for a few days, it helps me kind of like hone in on, okay, so I wrote this like page of largely garbage, but like these two thoughts stick out to me. So then like maybe the next morning when I'm like going through my morning pages, I'll like try to flesh those like 2 or 3 ideas that stuck out to me out a little bit more. And then like slowly as I do that, like 1 or 2 of them will get like more exciting. And then, like that to me is like a really good way to kind of like start the process of, if I'm thinking about like, I want to write a feature, so I need 10 ideas for feature scripts, or I want to write a short film. So like, what are like a bunch of things that I think would be cool to have happen in a short film. Oh, this one seems the coolest. So like, okay, what is that? Who are the characters in that? So it's like, it's breaking down those like kind of micro decisions into like, or all those decisions into like easily digestible steps that make it so it's like, it just makes it like less daunting.
And when you're doing TV writing and writing characters, how important is it for you to represent your community?
It's hugely important. So, ultimately, like I'm a comedy writer, I'm writing jokes. So I'm like trying to, be as funny as possible in my writing and tell interesting stories. But, in terms of representation, it's like very important to me that like I'm creating work that like I, at the very least, stand behind as good representation, if that makes sense. Like that's a lot of the like a lot of the conversation that we have in the writers' room with Spirit Rangers, which is it's the first kid show in the history of US animation created by a Native person with an all-Native writers' room. About Native characters played by Native actors. There's like Native people all over on the team, and a lot of our conversations in the writers' room, because we're like all Native folks working on the show, is like, okay, like what do we want this to like? What do we want to say about the Native experience? And I think that like those kinds of conversations, on top of just trying to make a funny, cool kid show, are like, it's like all of us really putting a lot of work into, making sure that we create like the work that we wish existed when we grew up.
What have you learned throughout your professional journey?
One is it's important to try. So by that, I mean, I feel like I talk to a lot of people who like want to enter into creative fields, or, they want to like take a chance and try something new, trying a new hobby, starting writing, starting painting, to make music, or, going to school for a different thing or whatever, or like even just going to school, period. And my attitude is that it's better to like try something and find out that you don't like it than it is to spend your life wanting to try something. Because like I feel like I talk to a lot of people who like they tell me like, oh, you work as a TV writer, you write for a living, like, oh, I've always wanted to write. And it's like, yeah, I don't know, try maybe write a short story. If you hate it, then you'll no longer have to say I've always wanted to write. You can like move on to try something new. Like I feel like that's something just even in working in the entertainment industry, I'm always a big proponent of. Like when I was early in Hollywood, I tried auditioning and acting, and it just like wasn't fun for me, because it's just like, I don't know, you got to like be on set all day, and like as a comedy writer, I like sit in an air conditioned room and eat snacks for like 8 hours a day, and that's real fun. So it's like, so I and that's something that I would have only known through trying so yeah, I would say like don't be afraid to try. Also, like if you're working in a freelance industry, some of the best advice I ever got was from an internship that I did before moving to Los Angeles. That was like, you have to like learn to embrace the uncertainty. Any freelance industry, you don't necessarily know what you're going to be doing 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever. You're definitely going to have periods of like unemployment between gigs and stuff like that. And it's something that's like really stressful if you're used to having any level of structure in your life. So I think for me, just like embracing that and like looking at like those periods as a potential for a new adventure is I think something that's like really helpful for me.
Your animated digital short, How to Cope with Your Team Changing Its Native American Mascot, was released by Comedy Central last year. Can you talk a bit more about the animated digital short?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking about that. That's a short that I released Comedy Central last October on the day of the last Cleveland Indians game under that name, which was a date I was very happy that maybe it was really pointed. Maybe there's a reason it came out on that day. And it's a short about sort of all of the weird things that like teams with Native sports mascots, all the fan bases of those teams do, and how they could like do something else as opposed to that, or pointing out like kind of how weird those things are. So an example for one of the jokes is like, instead of moving your arm up and down to do the tomahawk chop, wave it side to side, so you're waving hello at the opposing team, like stuff like that. And I worked on it with a lot of really great native comedic talent. Janice Meeting from Rutherford Falls provided one of the voices, John Timothy from Spirit Rangers, Tyler Clare, who's one of the writers of Rutherford Falls. And it was animated by David Kantowitz, who's a good friend of mine, who I worked with him on a short before that, did really well on the festival circuit and like went viral on native TikTok and all that, called telling people you're Native American when you're not Native is a lot like telling a bear you're a bear when you're not a bear. The name's 24 words long. It's I get tired every time I say it. And like that short was basically just about all of the weird microaggressions that just Native folks run into kind of in day-to-day life. And made that short. I really had a great experience making it. When I started kind of talking with Comedy Central about working on a couple projects, I just wanted to make some more animated shorts. So I pitched the sports mascot short as just sort of like kind of a spiritual sequel to the previous short of like, hey, let's just do another thing like this, but about sports mascots. And they were a really great team to work with. They were really supportive, and they really listened to me in the process of like all the sports mascot heads in it were designed by Marie Bauer, who's like an amazing Indigenous artist who works on a lot of different shows. It's a fun 3.5 minutes worth of goofs that I'm real proud of.
So Comedy Central is a big name. Do you have to have one of your works broadcasted through them? What did that signify to you?
Wow, that's like such a good question to ask me. There's a couple of things there. Like I mentioned to you earlier that growing up, I really loved comedy, but didn't think I was like allowed to work in comedy. So for me, like 20, 25, however many long ago, years later, to being a kid and seeing like all this like really great comedy stuff on TV, but not feeling like I was like able to participate. For me to release something with Comedy Central, one of the biggest comedy brands in the world, with like my name and face on it, knowing that I'm like able to use that to like also lift up other funny Native folks who like, are some of the funniest folks in, comedy going today. And, to create like what I hope is like that kind of representation that I wish existed growing up. That's like legit one of the most like meaningful and for full circle moments of my life, I think. Just that I like got to do that coming from where I came from. And, my hope is that like, is that it's a funny short that, natives and non-natives dig, but like also like, funny Native kids growing up in reservations, like see that stuff, and that it like gives them the permission to dream that like I didn't think I had growing up.
What do you hope people feel whenever they listen to or see something that you have written or helped with?
Look, if they're watching and listening to me on this broadcast, I hope they watch all the other broadcasts of this show. It's great. I don't know. I mean, that's a big question. I think as a comedian, writer, storyteller-y person, I think that my job is basically to like communicate how I feel about something and the emotions that I feel about something to my audience in a clear way. So, it's like if I'm, just like doing goofs about Garfield on a podcast, then I want them to be like, oh, that's a funny goof about Garfield. Mm-hmm. If they're, if I'm like, having like a conversation like this about, Native stuff, I just hope people like listen and internalize the things I'm talking about. It kind of like depends on the context, but I hope that whatever like voice I put out, I'm thankful that people like hearing it, and I hope they keep like hearing it so I can have a long career.
I also want to touch upon the Earwolf podcast episode you appeared on back in 2019, in which you spoke about the tokenization of Native people in the media. I listened to it a bit when I was doing my research and coming up with questions for this interview. And I just want to say it was inspiring. You brought up a conversation that needed to be addressed in a respectful and elegant manner. So now I'm not Native American, so I can never relate to your experience, but it made me think about situations that I have been in where I should have spoken up for my community, but I just didn't have like the courage to do so. So I want to ask you, how did you know that enough was enough, and like you got to say something, like you got to address the elephant in the room?
Thanks for listening to that. I appreciate that and those kind words. I think that this kind of ties back to your earlier question about, doing kind of right by my community. Like, I think that for me, there's not a ton of natives working in the entertainment industry. Native Hollywood is maybe like, maybe like a couple hundred people or something like that. Like probably like mid hundreds. Native comedians, there's like, a couple dozen of us, maybe 100 if you count like all native comedians that are doing stuff, even at the open mic level. Like for a time, I was like, I would say the only native comedian that got those kinds of opportunities in the Los Angeles comedy scene. Being interviewed on, big LA comedy podcasts, I'm doing, shows at places like UCB and stuff like that. Like I'm to this day, the only native comedian to ever get on a house team with the Upright Citizens Brigade in Los Angeles. And, that's like a weight that I take really seriously. Like I know I'm a comedy writer and I write jokes for a living, but understanding that like I'm, for a lot of people, like, like when I have meetings and I'm booked on shows, people will often tell me I'm the first native comedian that they've met with or booked on a show or something like that. So, I think that can feel like, from my perspective, like there's kind of a weight on my shoulders to like represent myself well as a comedian, but also to like represent my people well. I think that there's also just moments where like, that's an example of like having that conversation, which, by the way, the host of that show, very nice people, we've talked since, and them doing what they did definitely came from a place of having blind spots, but not from any level of like maliciousness or anything. Like, as you heard on the show, they were very apologetic. And I think that like there were a couple of things at play in me needing to have that conversation. When we recorded that in 2019, I'd been in Los Angeles for 9 years. All of those hosts I'd worked with previously in LA comedy. The two main hosts of the show were my sketch comedy teachers, who I really looked up to when I first started doing comedy. The producer of the show is somebody that was like a co-host on a show that I did at UCB in like 2017, 2018. So these are people that, like I thought respected me as a comedian. And, so for them to ask me to be on like that episode of that show in that way, it was gross for so many reasons of like, why would you put somebody in that position? But it also, for me, just kind of felt like I've worked for 9 years with you people to like make comedy, and like, and it's sort of like, oh, that's what you see me as. Like it's just, it's like tokenizing, and it kind of like, I think for me, put me in like a very small box of like the things that I'm like that I was allowed to talk about. And like specifically for that show, it's like I grew up as a gamer. Like I grew up as somebody who loved video games. I'm like kind of a dork. So it's like, there's a world where I'm like a perfect fit for that show outside of talking about native trauma. So to only be invited on to talk about some of the worst native trauma you could possibly imagine in your life, and like, I guess try to make it funny, it was the intent, is like, it's like there's that side of it. And then there's also the side of it of like, if I were to just go on that show and like crack jokes about like one of the most traumatizing things ever, like, I think that I don't want to show like other native comedians or native kids or native folks that are like, put in similar positions, that like they have to do that, that they have to like, that like, it's like if you're in elementary school or whatever, and you're the only native kid in school, and your teacher asks for you to explain like, I don't know, Thanksgiving's weird for you, right? Or whatever. You don't like have to have that conversation. Like you don't have to like, you don't owe people explaining to them your people's trauma. And that was just something where like, I kind of felt like if I were to go on that show and not say something, I don't think I would have been able to like look myself in the mirror, And, it's like, it's something that I went into knowing that it was like risky for me to do, because like, like the hosts of that show are like more accomplished comedians than I am. As I mentioned earlier, your jobs in the entertainment industry largely come through word of mouth. So it's like, if you, are a jerk or suck or whatever, it's like, it's going to be tougher to find work. So, it's like, it really felt like I wrote an op-ed about this, and I described it as like, it felt like it was like trying to thread a needle with like a piece of thread that was the size of the Golden Gate Bridge, you know? So I definitely went into it being like, well, this might be the thing that like tanks my career, which I love and have worked so hard for. But it's more important to me that I'm like honest with my emotions in that situation than to just like play the game. And, you know, something that like, you know, this wasn't necessarily my intent for doing it, but like, you know, like after doing it, it's been so meaningful to me to have folks, natives and non-natives, reaching out to me and telling me that it like, you know, gave them power to speak up in their own lives and to you know, have these tough conversations with friends who are just, you know, like maybe saying weird racial microaggression things, not because they're jerks, but just because they like don't know any better, and you know, convincing people to speak up in those situations. And like I moved to LA just to like tell jokes and be a comedian, and I am so thankful that I was able to do something that I think helped a bunch of people.
So you also created the LA Underground Cat Network, which has 15,000 Facebook members. What made you decide to do this and how did it come to be?
I appreciate the transition. Yay. Now I can talk about, it's like, oh, you talked about like a tough thing. Now I'm talking about cats. Yay. I'm a big cat guy. I love cats. Somebody created a Facebook group in the Los Angeles comedy scene in, you know, probably the mid 2010s that was called the LA Underground Comedy Network, for people to, you know, like if there's like a sold out show at, you know, UCB or wherever, and you have a ticket for it that you need to get rid of, you can, you know, like, here's a group of people you can easily be like, hey, I've got extra tickets for the show, or I'm looking for, you know, a cameraman for a sketch to shoot, or like a director for something or whatever, just sort of like a comedian networking promoting group. And I, as a comedian that loves cats, just started posting a bunch of cat pictures in the group. And I think that somebody responded sarcastically like, hey, you should just, why don't you just create your own LA Underground Cat Network if you're going to do this? And I was like, oh, I will. So I created it. It very quickly blew up. Yeah, now it has 15,000 members and is like a major source of like cat networking for rescues in Los Angeles. We also do like in-person events pre-pandemic. We like, I, using the LA Underground Cat Network and my Twitter following, we like sold out a screening of the Cats movie in Burbank, and turned it, we just like hijacked it and turned it into a sing-along screening.
Oh my God.
I bought 50 pairs of cat ears from Amazon, and everybody who walked into the screening, I gave a free pair of cat ears. It was very cute and fun. It was shared by the official Cats movie Twitter account, which is the greatest honor of my life. But yeah, I like cats, so I do bits. I made a Facebook group.
So before we end, we have some rapid fire questions to ask. The first question is, what is your favorite color?
If you would have asked me when I was younger, I would say I really like really bright, obnoxious colors like orange. Like I used to wear like an orange construction worker jacket when I was in college. I do not work in construction. And it was like very clean because I never like did anything. It was just like cool because it was like orange and I had like reflective tape on it. And but I think that as I've grown older, I like more earth tones, like a lot of like blues, browns, tans, stuff like that.
When are you the happiest?
I think that when I'm the happiest is when I'm in community with people that I'm friends and care about, making each other crack up, doing some communal activity, watching pro wrestling, playing board games, you know, like, yeah, I would say just like in community with people who make me laugh and we're making each other laugh.
If you could have 3 people dead or alive for dinner, who would it be?
I'm gonna say alive because I feel like dead people would be gross to have dinner with. What do dead people eat? I don't know. Like,
Nothing.
yeah, I don't know. Their stomachs don't work. Alive, dead or alive? Let's see. I'm gonna say Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, Buffy St. Marie, who's an amazing native musician, and I'm gonna say, I know I joked about not wanting to do with dead people, but I would love to talk to like, you know, somebody of my like grandparents or great grandparents generation, like, you know, one of my like recent ancestors who's no longer with us, to just kind of like thank them for their work in keeping our culture alive, you know.
What is a song that you have on repeat currently?
I listen to a lot of really specific music when I'm writing. oftentimes it's like instrumental music with no vocals and very little percussion, just because it like helps me focus and keeps my mind focused on it. So I feel like my go-to for writing is like Legend of Zelda music with rain sounds. So it's like Legend of Zelda soundtrack, but somebody edit it so you can hear rain over it. So I'd say that's like something I listen to on repeat when I'm writing. When I'm not writing, let's see, the Blue Scholars is really good. They're really good. Seattle-based rap group. St. Vincent's great. Fiona Apple, just like, I don't know, like stuff like that. Like I feel like I listen to a lot of I'm a big professional wrestling fan, so I feel like when I'm about to like enter into a meeting or something like that I'm really stressed about, like I definitely like play pro wrestling entrance music to like pump myself up.
Oh my God, that's great.
What is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? So the answer that I give for this is it's probably, I'm not sure if it's like my favorite movie, but probably my most formative movie is Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, which is the sequel to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which was like a really popular 1980s movie. And it's like looking back on it, it's just one of those crazy, like the main characters like go to hell and then have like a chess match with death, and then they like partner with aliens to use rock music to like beat the devil, and like it's very much a high concept crazy movie, but at its core are like two characters who are entirely driven by the powers of positivity and optimism. And I think that for me, just as somebody growing up, it's like that's something that I look back to as like the type of person that I like try to be, just like try to be optimistic. I try to like look at the world through as bright of a lens as I can, hope that people are trying their best, and hope that I'm doing the same.
What is a book that you have read recently or are currently reading that you would recommend?
So I'm a bad like pleasure reader right now. I'm just like busy with a bunch of like different writing projects, so I'm not like reading anything right this second, other than just like stuff to research for work. But I really like the book. If somebody's interested in working in comedy, or like interested in comedy in general, and Here's the Kicker by Mike Sachs is a really good book. That's like it's conversations with a bunch of top well-known comedians and comedy writers about just kind of the craft of comedy writing. And what I really liked about that book when it came out, and what really spoke to me, is I feel like in my career, it's like kind of narrowing down on what my career is. It's like it was important for me to find people who like felt like the type of people that I would like to be like when I'm older, when I'm in my 40s, 50s, and stuff like that. I feel like people who work in similar careers have similar kind of character traits and personality traits. Like there's definitely something that like doctors have in common that gives them the motivation to like go to medical school, or like lawyers and stuff like that. And I feel like for me, that book was really helpful to like read some of those interviews, and not just get like the comedy advice or whatever, but also to see like, oh, it feels like this person's worldview is really similar to my worldview, or like, oh, I feel like when I'm like 60, I want to be like that guy, not just in terms of career, but just in terms of like how they seem to be as a person.
Mhm.
And so Here's the Kicker, I think, is a really good look at just like how comedy writers are as people.
So thank you, Joe, for taking the time out of your day to talk with us. Can you let everyone at home know about any upcoming projects and where they can connect with you?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Joeytainment. You can follow me on Instagram at Joey Clift with like 5 or 6 eyes. The reason for that is the 12-year-old took Joey Clift with one eye, and I don't know how to get it from him. I mean, this was years ago, so now I'm sure he's like 20 or whatever. But yeah, so yeah, follow me on social media. And if you follow me on social media, if I remember that third piece of advice that I blanked on earlier, oh, cliffhanger, maybe I'll tweet about it if I remember it. And then, current projects, I've got a new short film called My First Native American Boyfriend that's currently going through the festival circuit. That's, so that's probably going to be screening near you in the near future. My Comedy Central short, you can find on all of Comedy Central's social media channels. Spirit Rangers is coming out later this year. We don't have a date yet, but it's going to be real. It's coming out later this year, and it's going to be real cool. And I think people are really going to like it. So yeah, I'd say those are probably the main things I'm, promoting. Also, this show. Everybody watch this show. This show's good. I'm going to shout out and promote this show.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Joey. We really appreciate having you here. And yeah, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.